Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you everybody for joining this afternoon. In today's presentation, we'll be going through a brief overview of encryption technologies and discussing not only how and where we should be encrypting content, but also the different techniques, and also discussing how Virtru approaches this space a little bit different from some of the other vendors out there and why we're handling that in a different manner. And then finally, we'll end up with a brief demonstration. As Emily mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, we'd love to address those at the end of the presentation. So please enter those in the question and answer box in your GoToWebinar meeting. So as we're thinking about protecting data and as we're thinking about moving our data to the cloud, in reality, the status quo is no longer meeting our data protection needs. As we see the various unfortunate breaches that are going on in our environments, from a trust standpoint, we also need to consider where and who is handling our data elements and who has access to that content. As we move to cloud environments, we're also deeply concerned about new compliance regulations, whether they be data that's under export control, data that needs to be resident in your country of residence or going through that. But at all times, as we move our data to the cloud, how do we maintain control of this data as we go through? So this is where we historically are applying encryption technologies. Encryption is a fantastic way for us to protect elements of our data that are most sensitive, and we can apply those as IT administrators in various ways or various mechanisms. But in reality, the systems that we choose may or may not have the levels of protection that we need. As we work in a collaborative environment, sharing documents, sharing information inside of our organization, how are we ensuring that our sensitive intellectual property as an organization is being protected? And as we share this outside of an environment, how do we ensure that we maintain control of that environment? And that's where we're applying encryption technologies within our systems. But as we consider the application of this technology, we need to be ensured that we are not losing control of the actual encryption keys that are associated with this content. So in Steve Rowley's report from Gartner of last year, this is a fantastic quote, is as we apply encryption technologies, we need to ensure that we also have good key management practices such that we never lose control of those keys. Think of a valet as we drop off our car. We want to assure that they only have access to our car for a certain period or a certain aspect. We don't want to just hand over the keys and assume that that valet is going to be able to handle our car in an appropriate manner. So as we apply this, I want to step back briefly and discuss some of the basics of encryption, rather than getting into all the details of encryption, all the mathematics, or going through this, just some of the basics that we need to consider when we're discussing encryption keys and the handling of those keys. And how we'll start with that conversation is by highlighting two different mechanisms that are out there to protect and encrypt technology. The first one is going to be symmetric encryption. The concept here is like an automobile, where that you have a single key that can both open the doors, you can start that automobile. The exact same key that is used to encrypt data is also used to decrypt that. So protection of that key is a really important thing, because if you lose access to that key, or you lose that key, or you gain access to somebody that has access to both the key and the content, then that is effectively giving them access to decrypt the data. So technologies that will use symmetric encryption keys. So as we think about endpoint protection, where you have full disk encryption on your laptops with File Vault or BitLocker or other technologies with that, those will use symmetric types of encryption. Password protected PDFs or zip files, AWS encryption are all areas that will use symmetric types of keys encryptions. In the email world, this is where portals can use that technology as well. Another technology that is similar in that it protects content is asymmetric encryption. The difference, though, is that to protect the content, you will use a public key that can be available to anybody, and that public key is only a one-way exercise. So access to that public key will use to that, where a separate private key is used to decrypt messages. This is the core of what makes the internet work, from secure connections and going through that, the core of other encrypted mail technologies such as PGP or SMIME. But the biggest difference here is there is a two-key system that will handle this, and that private key and protection of that private key is of the utmost importance. So we saw, unfortunately, an Adobe engineer leaked a private key, which effectively means it just leaked the information to decrypt any content associated with that was encrypted with that public key. So as we're thinking about the encryption basics, we're also thinking about key management, but let's talk about how these basics apply to the most commonly used encryption technologies for email encryption. So the core of a good, secure system for communicating both between servers as well as email is TLS encryption. So transport layer security is the underlying technologies that when you go to your browser and you see HTTP with an S at the end, or a little lock on your screen, or if you're a G Suite or Gmail customer, you see little locks next to email addresses. What that is indicating is that a type of encryption is being used to protect the communications between servers or clients and each other. Fantastic technology that will allow or prevent any eavesdropper that's listening to that connection or has access to that network connection, will prevent them from seeing the data in transit, but the actual zeros and ones, the bits and the bytes, are actually being transmitted as normal across those pipes. So there's no guaranteed access that the mail servers in between or the providers don't have access to that content. And as email as it is can be forwarded, can be moved on to other environments, other servers in between, there's no guarantee that later connections provide that TLS encryption. So TLS, fantastic, is really a best practice for anything that we do from an encryption standpoint, but it's really not enough to handle full content protection after this leaves our environments. Going back to the basics before, this is an asymmetric encryption method. It's really set up by administrators. There's really no user intervention that goes along with this. So fantastic from an ease of use standpoint. Security, there is some to be left to be desired. And that's where we will get into the world for email, where we introduce this concept of a portal. So the concept of a portal is that instead of delivering encrypted messages or relying purely on TLS encryption, the actual content is uploaded to another vendor's site, and then that content is accessible to any of the recipients by logging into that portal, usually creating a new password, and then decrypting the content in that environment. Going back to the basics, typically an asymmetric encryption technology will be used, so that portal vendor will have both the encryption keys and the content. From a recipient standpoint, they're really not using their existing email systems, they're really logging into this portal to go access that content or go see that. So you're not necessarily leveraging your existing systems, you're trusting an external vendor to handle the technology and handle the environment as going through that. And you're also depending on the recipients to go access that information or go through that. So user experience and sharing and collaboration isn't necessarily at its maximum, but you do have at least an additional layer of protection on top of that. Going to a little bit more traditionally client-side based encryption, the first two approaches were purely server-side in most instances, where you have server technologies that are handling there. Our IT administrators are setting up and administering those servers, relatively transparent to the senders, not so much as transparent to the recipients in the portal instance. So one of the other methodologies that can be employed is using some encryption technology that's historically deployed on the client side, such that if you're in your Outlook instance, you can use SMIME encryption to encrypt content to any of the recipients who are also use SMIME technology. or use pretty good privacy. PGP is another common method or mechanism for this. In this case, this is an asymmetric method that if you have access to the recipient's public keys, then you're able to encrypt content with those keys, and the recipient will use their private key to decrypt this. So this is commonly client-side, and the reason we say commonly or usually decrypted client-side are sometimes there are server-side technologies. G Suite has recently introduced their enterprise offering, which involves or allows for MIME to encrypt on the server. There are other gateway vendors that will use PGP on a portal, but the recipient experience is really indicates that they must use that technology or handle that. So the provider, good news is usually doesn't have access to those encryption keys. The downside is really usability. How do we ensure that we use encrypted communications? How can we share encrypted communications whether or not we know those users are using that technology? All of these are the potential downsides of applying both PGP and MIME from a standards basis. So at the end of the day, we have these two aspects when we're thinking about our data and how we're controlling our elements. Number one, we're not going to eliminate the need to share data. So we're not going to eliminate the need for us to send our customers information. We're not going to eliminate the need to send partners the ability to share our intellectual property. But the challenge in many instances is not protecting that data in the systems we controlled. It's how do we make it easy to share across an outsider environment. But as we introduce this, the other struggle is as we introduce new technologies like that PGP or MIME or use portals, this must be easy. If we're introducing a bunch of new steps or workflows and causing friction, we all know that we're not going to use that technology. And that's really what the challenge as it comes down at the end of the day between this choice that businesses will typically have to make between sharing, protecting, and making it easy within their environments. And that is really where Virtru's mission comes in. We want to create the Venn diagram, if you will, the happy place in the center where not only can you protect data according to your business standards, your compliance needs and going through that, but make it as easy to use as possible, both from the sender and the recipient standpoint. Okay, so we want to ensure that in this case, as the quote from Eric at a customer at a healthcare company, is that we are not getting in the way of our users. We are actually making it both convenient and we're meeting our security from a compliance standpoint or compliance needs. So how we make this happen is we want to focus on three specific areas when you're handling this. The first and most important is protection. So Virtru allows for you to protect data in the environments that you're familiar with. Are you in an Outlook? Are you in your native G Suite experience? Are you in your Office 365 web experience? Protect that directly from now, allowing your content creators to simply flip on a switch to handle that. If there's environments like systems or controls, maybe the earliest point from an IT standpoint is through mail servers or going through that. Virtru provides that technology no matter where it's stored or handling that. As it leaves the environment and it shares that, the whole purpose of Virtru and the format that our co-founder Will Ackerley built is the trusted data format. It is purely designed to share protected data outside of your boundaries such that no unauthorized party has access to that content. And always maintaining control of that data such that I can revoke access to any time. As we think about this, as we know who has access to our content, we also must consider the keys as we have that. Anytime we talk about encryption technology, earlier to the quote from Gartner is we also must always consider key management. So we think about the data in the diagram before, we had little red dots indicating all the data that's protected or unprotected inside and outside of our barriers. Virtru applies to those data elements inside, but we don't lose track of what are the options you must consider and also controlling the keys in that environment. And that's really where key management comes into play. At all times, when you use Virtru technology, you are the owner of your encryption keys within that environment. You have access and control. You have the ability to control who has access to that. But there's different implementations depending on your security requirements and your compliance requirements that come into play when you think about both applying Virtru's encryption technology as well as handling that in your environment. And this is where we give you the option of where your keys are stored and how they're handled. So at its core, Virtru is a software as a service. Software as a service technology is fantastic because it lets us provide the ability to protect data outside of your environment as it's sitting in other email servers or going through that. And as a result, our pure software as a service offering, we host this information and we host the storage of keys within Amazon Web Services. But you as the customer, you have full access to manage the access to those keys and going through that. And even though Virtru has software as a service that manages those keys, we at no time actually have the ability to decrypt any of your information or access your unencrypted information from our software as a service. We always apply that client side. Another thing to note with our pure software as a service is no cloud provider in between unless you give them access, has access to content. So if you're on Microsoft's Office 365 platform, no Microsoft engineer will have access to get those encryption keys or go through that. Same with Google. Google would never have access when you apply client-side encryption to either decrypt content or access the keys. Those are not authorized parties. But in some instances, us storing keys in Amazon Web Services is not enough protection. So what that means is we want to ensure that we can provide the most easy to use encryption technologies, but we also want to ensure that Virtru will never have access to those encryption keys, those AES 256-bit encryption keys. And this is where the steps 2 and the 3 in the pyramid come into play. In the hybrid cloud instance, we will use a customer key server that you have and can be hosted by you to basically assure all key operations will go through. And then if you leverage hardware security modules or other encryption providers that you would like an additional layer on top of that, this is where you can bring your own key offering built even on top of that. So let's demonstrably show what this looks like from a keys, because the keys are the most important part here. The encrypted content is always happening inside of your content creator's experience, or in this case, we have the Virtru Data Network Protection Gateway that can also perform encryption operations. All of those activities are going to be outside of Virtru's software as a service. The encryption keys will always be uploaded over secure connections to Virtru's key server or access control manager to distribute those keys. Anytime a request is done from one of your recipients of those messages, we will handle all of that federated identity. What is this person's identity? Are they authenticated? Are they authorized to receive those keys? If all of those things are happening, they'll go decrypt on their endpoints, always using client-side technologies. But you'll notice these little blue keys, they're sitting up in that Virtru software as a service. We're going to go up one layer of the pyramid to the hybrid cloud offering. When we discuss both the hybrid cloud offering as well as the top level with the hardware security module, the model is very similar from both the encryption and the decryption standpoint, but the biggest difference here is we're introducing an additional layer of protection such that before the keys are ever uploaded to Virtru software as a service, before they're handled there, we apply additional layer of protection on those keys to encrypt them with a public key associated with the customer key server. So if we go back to our basics, public and private cryptography, that public key is used to encrypt the actual symmetric encryption keys or the message keys that we're storing. And then anytime a request is made for those keys, they're going to be sent down to the customer's key server for decryption purposes, because that is the only place where that private key exists. So a picture of that would look like from the customer's key server standpoint is a key is requested. Those are going to be requested from one of your recipients. That recipient will also pass a public key associated with this. This is all transparent to this, to both the senders and the recipients here. and we ensure that Virtru never sees that most important thing, the message key, to protect the content. So the big benefit of this approach is we can provide an easy to use platform that will allow you to provide client-side encryption, the seamless user experience from both the sender and the recipient standpoint, but also ensure that Virtru never sees the encryption keys come into play. Some of the reasons why our customers are choosing to implement customer key servers are listed here. One of the main ones, is skipping down on the list, is around government surveillance. We have many media customers and newspapers and news organizations that are leveraging our technology that are naturally concerned about the government's potential access to any important information around them. So using this approach, we guarantee access that all subpoenas, blind subpoenas, all blind warrants within an environment must go to our customers directly, as we have that. We also have different compliance controls, whether it be export controls for export arms regulations, criminal justice information that require specific data residency requirements in countries of residence. As we work in Europe, there are certain regulations that assure encryption operations must reside in France or Belgium or Germany. This is a case where we can ensure, even though Virtru is an American company, that all encryption operations will go through that country of residence. So we want to do this all and have all this infrastructure in place, but we still want to provide that easy to use experience from the customer standpoint, or from your senders and your receivers. And that's really the most critical aspect of that. And rather than showing you slides and going through that, we're going to go step through a brief demonstration of sending and receiving encrypted emails and discuss if if the customer key servers are in play or they're not, and what's happening to those encryption keys. One thing to note as we go through this, Virtru is a recommended partner by Google from the G Suite platform. We're one of the few vendors that are partners with Google in this case, and we're the only recommended partner for encryption. What that means, we've gone through the standards and the security standards that Google puts upon us for that environment, so that we can have that badge of honor. We've recently also been added to the Microsoft Accelerator program that will allow us direct access and direct integrations into Microsoft that other encryption vendors don't have, and we'll show some of those beginnings today with our Outlook web experience for Office 365. So let's go together and see what this experience looks like. So I'm going to step through a brief demonstration of both sending and receiving information. The first number one tenet of Virtru is that we want to make this as easy to use as possible for the senders and the recipient standpoint without that sacrifice of security. So we're going to start in a G Suite environment. We're going to send an encrypted message. We're going to go receive that to a person in Office 365 that has Virtru installed through one of our extensions. And then we're going to finish in stepping that through an experience where the recipient does not have Virtru installed, because that is one of the key things to consider is what if the other recipient does not have this technology installed? Will they be required to use it? What's their experience look like? So let's start by sending a secure message. So in this case, we're going to start with a little bit US-centric type of data, but something we could all understand as a national identifier. When we're dealing with healthcare data, one of the common things to send around is we're under anything related to healthcare compliance. In the US, that's HIPAA compliance. In this case, anything related to Social Security numbers, our national identifiers, any codes that are sitting in systems, those represent data that need to be protected both inside and outside of our environment. So if I were to choose to send this without Virtru protection enabled, the first thing we're going to notice is our administrator has set up a warning indicating there is a policy in place anytime I detect a Social Security number. We should be encrypting this information, adding that additional layer of encryption. So in that case, I could choose to send this securely. If my administrator set up, I'm not even going to give the user an option or a warning. We could have automatically encrypted that as we go through that. So I'm going to step back here and say, okay, I'm going to go apply Virtru protection. And really, it was as simple as that. Right now, by flipping the Virtru protection switch on through the Chrome extension for G Suite, I have generated a symmetric encryption key, AES 256-bit, and am encrypting this draft of the message. As I include an attachment, so I'm going to include a PDF file here. As I include that attachment within here, I can see that has changed to a trusted data format, is our encryption layer that we're applying to this PDF, indicating that this email and this attachment have been encrypted through that. I also have these additional control options when I'm sending this or after the fact to do things such as that we see here. Eliminate the ability to forward this encrypted content to other parties. Also set automatic expiration. So if I wanted to ensure that this is only available for a period of time, we're going through that. Or we have a functionality that will take any of your PDF data, prevent printing and download of that data, is also watermark the recipients as we have that. But as I apply these technologies, we'll encrypt client side when we're using these extensions. So this will actually go out as encrypted content. If I go to my sent message here, we can say your confirmation and go look at the original message that's being sent from here and show you the original. The most important thing to notice is Google, in this case, since we're using Google to send this message from, will never have access because all of that data, all of the attachment that we're looking at has applied client-side encryption, so it's not accessible to them. Okay. So from a recipient standpoint, you will have either one of two experiences. The first one is if I have Virtru installed, we'll decrypt automatically directly in line. And the way we'll do that is we'll provide client-side decryption options. In this case, we have a Chrome extension that we've installed inside of our browser here that allows us to hook into native Office 365's Outlook web experience. You have the ability to create new encrypted content or going through that. But really, as we're looking at this, this will provide the same seamless experience as we're going through, including that DLP. We're showing a lot of web technologies today just for simplicity, but this would be a similar experience to your Outlook. If you're still on-premise Exchange and you're primarily using Outlook, 2010 through 2016 will provide seamless encryption and decryption as well as content scanning from that. But anytime you send encrypted content and messages, the easiest experience is always going to be when you have that technology installed. The other consideration is what happens when a recipient does not have that technology installed. So in this case, we're going to go look at the other instance when Virtru encryption is not applied, or not necessarily not applied, but when Virtru is not installed in this environment. So now we'll just go to a regular Gmail account as we have this. And what you'll see is you'll see a customizable message, all from both the branding, the template, the senders have this, but now you're receiving a message that you have received an encrypted communication as you're going through that. Remember, this message is sitting on this server outside of this as encrypted messages. So unless you have access to that AES 256-bit encryption key, you're not able to decrypt any of this. So in this case, this is where this unlock message button allows us to, number one, launch a browser session. So this is not a portal. This is actually launching a browser session with some JavaScript in it. And that JavaScript will allow us to do several things. The first thing it'll allow us to do is authenticate the users such that we know the identity of the recipients of those messages. A really important thing when you're thinking about encryption technology is we want to ensure only authorized parties are able to access content. And that's really important because we want to ensure that a rogue or a rogue member of a team or an attacker has not gained access to this. So we need to authenticate those users. So you noticed a few different icons next to those, and those icons represent the systems or the recipients of those emails. We will, if there is a system that allows us to log in or use the existing identity, we're going to use it. So when I mean log in, for the technical folks in the firm, this is going to be OAuth or SAML or OpenID. Systems like Google's G Suite or Microsoft's Office 365 provide us as a cloud provider ways to authenticate those users to log in with their existing IDs. No problem if you don't have one of those systems. we're still on-prem exchange, we're on a cloud provider that does not have that, there's this secondary authentication flow that those recipients will use. When we authenticate the user, then they're able to decrypt this. This still is client-side decryption. This is still decrypting only in the browser. If I was on my phone, this would be on my iOS or Android device, decrypting directly in there. Any of the attachments I can go view, and remember I enabled that PDF watermarking feature, so I disable the download or the printing of this, and we also watermark the recipient's address as content protection. So all of these are control capabilities that we have, but at all time, do those senders have control of that data and those elements. So if we go back to that sent email item and I go look at this, you'll notice a few things about the email. So the first one is we have read receipts indicating that these messages have been read, but we've got this all-important hand button. And that hand button, that revoke message, will revoke access to the recipients of that email message such that they will no longer be able to access the content of the message or handle that. So that can happen anywhere between almost instantaneously to a couple seconds later, depending on where the user is. But even if the message is opened, access will be revoked to that content. So this is truly, you as a mail administrator have that undo button, that button that will assure that if I accidentally sent to one of these recipients, accidentally included the wrong attachment, those are all controls that are available through that. And even further controls, as administrators, you have the ability to understand, has message violated rules that we've had set up? Have messages been forwarded on to recipients that should not be access to the content? So being able to see outside of my environment, if I had not chosen to enable, disable forwarding or going through that, those are all control capabilities that are available to you, both as the sender of the message or you as administrators of your email systems. So at the end of the day, Virtru is here to protect your most sensitive content, but not disable the ability to share or control access to that content. And that's really where we want to make this as easy to use as possible, but also ensure that no unauthorized party has access to that. As we discuss the concepts of encryption keys or going through that, we have our offering. Behind all of this technology, there may or may not be a customer key server, but from you as an administrator, as you go through that, the sender and the recipient experience is going to be exactly the same. When I have a customer key server backing my domain, all of the operations, all of the decryptions will all go through that customer key server, but will be seamless from the recipient and sender experience. But you as administrators, you as a compliance department will assure that Virtru never has protection or access of that content as we have. So that's Virtru as a nutshell. As we think about applying Virtru technology or any encryption technology, the one thing that we want to ensure is providing an experience that is seamless for your end users, but also assure that you never lose access or control of those keys as we have it. So now I'd love to open up the floor for questions that you may have asked already in the Q&A panel, or you can ask right now and be happy to follow up with those.
Okay, I've got a question here. Does the CKS impact search and e-discovery at all?
It does not. Those are really important aspects when you're considering applying client-side encryption technology, because historically, when we're discussing e-discovery, whether it be through provider vendors such as Google Vault, or through the e-discovery portal within Office 365, or systems like Mimecast or Global Relay, or all the other archiving and e-discovery vendors out there, one critical aspect is assuring that you're not breaking those processes. So Virtru has actually patented an approach that allows you to both search into your encrypted content, but not expose that information to e-discovery vendors. We also provide full support for those to be able to decrypt directly in line for certain vendors, or also provide decryption capabilities outside of that, because those business processes do not go away simply by applying encryption technology.
Okay, I think you've got another question here. Let me see. Do keys ever hit Virtru servers?
So that's a good question. So under the software as a service, the answer is yes. Encryption keys will sit on Virtru's key services, but we will assure that that transmission is done over a TLS connection, and any storage of those will be encrypted at least 2, if not 3 times at rest during the process there. Under the key server, when a Virtru customer key server is deployed on a customer site, those keys are always encrypted before they're ever uploaded to Virtru software as a service, so these will never be accessed in our services layer that we have.
Great. Where can I deploy a CKS?
That's a good question. So the customer key server is most typically deployed in our customers' data centers. So that's the most typical deployment because that gives you the utmost protection that assures only the private keys are accessible by your parties and you've protected those appropriately. However, we deploy this technology using container services. So some newer deployment technology from a DevOps standpoint is named Docker, and that gives us the utmost flexibility to also provide these in cloud services. So we have customers that will use country of residence data centers like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud Platform or Azure's information IaaS infrastructure and deploy the key servers as well. The key aspect is that you and your IT staff are managing and maintaining access to those and are handling that environment. So it really depends on the environment that you are maintaining from a data center standpoint.
Okay, great. Will the CKS work with Microsoft Exchange email?
Absolutely. So the really nice aspect of the key server is the key server itself is designed to interact directly with Virtru software as a service rather than individual servers that you deploy in your environment. So rather than opening up Exchange or SharePoint or any of your internal environments to directly to the key server, that's all handled directly through Virtru clients as we're going through that. So in this case, the actual encryption will always happen inside of our Outlook or our network protection gateways, and then that will be stored encrypted on Exchange in that environment, so we don't have to worry about direct connections in that case.
Okay. Can Virtru respond to a subpoena for a customer's encryption keys?
With the Virtru customer key server is we cannot, if we were subpoenaed via FISA court for any information, any of the encryption keys associated with that content, we would direct them directly to our customers because they are in control and access of that content.
Okay, great. I'm just going to give people, this is it for questions so far. While we're waiting for you to think of any other questions you guys have for us, I do have a poll question here I'm just going to put up. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please put them in the questions box and we'll get to them right after this. Okay, I'll just let this sit up for one more moment and then I will throw it back to Brett here. Okay, thank you. Let me see. I think that may be it for questions, Brett. I think we've got to everybody. What I would like to do is just let you guys know we will be reaching out to you first thing tomorrow with the recording from today's webinar, as well as a copy of our simple guide to key management, so you can kind of delve in deeper. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank Brett. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon and rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.